Its powerful technology actively finds and invites qualified candidates to apply to your job. So while other companies might deliver a lot of hay, ZipRecruiter finds you the needle in the haystack.
See why 4 out of 5 employers who post a job on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day. Try ZipRecruiter for free at ZipRecruiter.com/free. That's ZipRecruiter.com/free.
8:07. Let's get an update on the roads at the Team Hochberg Traffic Center with Jim Telemonte.
Rain is a factor this morning, and we are seeing some mild delays on some of the expressways. Also, there was a rollover crash reported on the outbound ride at 43rd Street. Prepare to slow down there. Inbound traffic moves okay on the ride. It's getting a little congested approaching downtown. The inbound Stevenson just a bit tight approaching the ride. Farther south, you see roadwork delays on I-55 in both directions between River Road and Blodgett. Inbound Eisenhower, traffic slow Ashland into the Burns Circle. That's just a 1 or 2 minute delay. Lakeshore Drive, traffic's a little bit heavy around the Oak Street curve. Just a little bit of routine morning congestion there. It's heavy starting around Michigan Avenue. Tollways are light. There are again hundreds of flight cancellations. It's traffic. I'm Jim Telemonte on AM 560, The Answer.
Chicago's Morning Answer continues next in our 1-hour heating and air conditioning weather center. Our meteorologist, Steve Williams.
Cloudy skies. It'll be windy this morning. Some sun by the afternoon. High today 43. Partly cloudy. Winds diminish tonight. It'll be cold. Low 25. Clouds and sun. A cold day for tomorrow. Daytime high 37. I'm Steve Williams on AM 560, The Answer.
It is 39 this morning at O'Hare. Next news at 8:30. Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
Listen to AM 560, The Answer, online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, and your Alexa-powered smart speaker, on TuneIn, iHeart, and radio.com. This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560, The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. President Trump yesterday in his briefing with his coronavirus task force talked about promising antiviral treatments for coronavirus, 2 drugs specifically.
Clinical trials are already underway for many new therapies, and we're working on scaling these to allow many more Americans to access different drugs that have shown really good promise. We've had some really good promise. We will do so in a way that lets us continue to collect good data to know which medicines are safe and which medicines are working the best.
The 2 are an anti-malarial drug that's been around for 70 years, chloroquine. The other is a drug developed by Gilead called remdesivir, which was used apparently effectively as in saving the lives of 2 gentlemen in Washington State who were very sick due to the coronavirus. And Dr. Steve Hahn, President Trump's FDA director, spoke on the topic.
Many Americans have read studies and heard media reports about this drug chloroquine, which is an anti-malarial drug. It's already approved, as the president said, for the treatment of malaria as well as an arthritis condition. That's a drug that the president has directed us to take a closer look at as to whether an expanded use approach to that could be done to actually see if that benefits patients. And again, we want to do that in the setting of a clinical trial, a large pragmatic clinical trial, to actually gather that information and answer the question that needs to be answered and asked and answered.
And Gilead followed up in a statement after that press conference saying is essentially the same thing. They don't have approval. This was used in compassionate use cases in Washington State, so they're still working through the clinical trial process with remdesivir as well. For more on the whole topic of the public health response, we're pleased to be joined by Dr. Mark Bruce, who's an emergency room physician and the ambassador to both Belize and Canada for the American College of Emergency Physicians. Dr. Bruce, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
You're welcome, Dan. Good to be with you.
How did you receive the information from the collective group yesterday about those 2 potential antiviral therapies?
Well, it's obviously good news. I mean, we await kind of further information. I mean, the whole idea behind medical science is data-driven. And so to make good decisions, both in terms of what should we do about this, but also how should we use this, at what dosage, who gets it, over what period of time, all those types of things, contraindications, are there patients that shouldn't receive this, is really data-driven. And so that's the idea behind going ahead and doing these substantial clinical studies to kind of get that kind of data. We do know that remdesivir in particular was used in MERS successfully. So, these are both RNA viruses. This is an AIDS drug. They are called protease inhibitors. And what that 50-cent word means is that it keeps the RNA virus, which is what COVID-19 is, from replicating itself. It really stops the replication that creates the tremendous viral load that people shed and can so easily transmit.
Do you think as a country or certain governors are overreacting when they completely shut states down?
Amy, the first rule, the first rule of any epidemic is you protect the uninfected. That's how an epidemic stays an epidemic and doesn't progress to a pandemic. A pandemic is basically the epidemic, which is an occurrence of an illness over a specific population at a specific point in time. And when that spreads to the entire, enveloping an entire country or an entire global community, that's the definition of a pandemic, which is what we're in now. So and we saw that rule violated, quite frankly, without any political bias by China. And so once this became a pandemic, following that same rule, protecting the uninfected allows you to contain and deal with the pandemic. So that's kind of a long answer to your question, Amy, but the answer is no, I don't think it's an overreaction at all.
But the guidelines, federal guidelines, are not calling for that. They're calling for social distancing. They're calling for, limitations on gatherings, sizes of gatherings, and so forth. But, a full shelter-in-place order, you don't think is an overreaction?
If it gets to that point, I do not think that that's an overreaction. Again, if you're going to make a mistake in something like this, you want to err on the side of caution. From what we know about this virus, and again, everybody needs to understand that this is a new virus. It's what we call a novel virus. So we didn't know about this virus 3 months ago. So we're rapidly learning more each day. This is a very, very fluid situation. We're learning more and more and more about this each day, each hour. And the more we understand, gee, there's some people that basically produce this virus more or can shed this virus more. The challenging thing about this virus is that it can be transmitted many days or even a few weeks before somebody becomes symptomatic. The average spread is the person who gets COVID-19, tests positive for COVID-19, will probably infect 2 to 3 other people. The perspective on that is, well, let's look at measles. Measles is another virus, and measles, basically, the average person who gets measles will infect 12 to 18 other people. So measles is very much more transmissible. But it's when we look at COVID-19 compared to SARS, compared to MERS, some very, very distinct differences. We still know that this is very easily transmissible, but in perspective, that the MERS and the SARS viruses, basically, you became symptomatic before you started shedding virus. So that's the challenge with this.
It isn't so much of the response predicated on a understanding of the lethality rate?
Yes, and it's also predicated, that response is predicated on what we've seen, particularly in Italy and Iran, some of these other countries that have really allowed that where this lack
has
of
metastasized.
Totally,
yeah,
it has. And so we saw 70% of the cases coming into the United States coming from, not so much coming from Asia, because that travel ban went into place in January, But 70% of the cases that we're seeing that are travel-related now are coming in from Europe.
Right, but so the reason I asked that, because the Italy situation, we reporting yesterday, 99% of those who died had at least one, most had more than one underlying condition. 3/4 had high blood pressure, a third had heart disease, a third had diabetes.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying, oh, those people don't matter, their lives don't matter. I'm not saying that, of course. But I am suggesting that the lethality rate, especially if some of the other conjecture about the number of people who are asymptomatic that are walking around with it may be dramatically lower than what has otherwise been widely reported. And yet, so you have to consider that in terms of the economic damage you're doing with the response that has been pursued in certain states and even at the federal level to some extent.
Yes, it does. But I would tell you this. When you're walking around and you're in stores, even maintaining appropriate social distancing, or in a restaurant or at work or wherever you are, how you know the medical history of the person that you're walking by?
No, right.
And none of us do. So we don't know if they're diabetic. We don't know if they're on an antihypertensive medication. And so that's why, because of that, we need to go out of our way to protect. We know who the vulnerable population is here. And that vulnerable population is just what you mentioned. It's that over 60 population. It's patients even under 60 that have these chronic diseases. Those are the ones that are at risk. But even without any, there is this subset of people that die from this that have none of that. It's a small percentage. But again, that's something that we really don't understand exactly why that occurs, why this not at-risk population can become very, very ill with this.
Is it a death sentence, though, if you get it?
No, not at all. And that's the encouraging news that I think that we saw from some of these new trials. There's even last week they were starting some trials in Nebraska. I know down in Australia they're doing trials. South Korea has done some trials. And so this information is being widely shared among the medical scientists. And as soon it's being fast-tracked, and again, based on what we know about the type of treatments that were effective in the same family of viruses with MERS and SARS, we have some encouragement and confidence to proceed with these other type of treatments, even on an experimental basis, because especially you always want to keep in mind what's worse, the disease or the cure. And because these medications can have substantial side effects. So just because it's worked well, we need to kind of understand this best in terms of dosage, who gets it, when do they get it, how much time do they require for treatment. All those questions are still being answered at this time.
And how much, I mean, from your perspective and from the doctors you talk to, how much of a dearth of supplies with respect to the protective gear that you want healthcare workers to be donning when they treat the infected, how much of an issue is that right now system-wide to your sort of best guesstimate?
Yeah, it's still a big problem. It's a very personal issue for me because one of my colleagues is currently quarantined because they had an unmasked exposure and had some risk in terms of some chronic disease too. So it left us scrambling to cover those shifts that colleague was scheduled for. And so we're still kind of down at least one staff member at this point in time. So it creates, again, we're trying to not only protect ourselves, but protect our patients too, whenever we encounter those patients that have symptoms that are certainly worthy of COVID testing.
When you going back to the antiviral therapies, the prospective ones, whether it's remdesivir or whether it's the anti-malarial drug, let's say those came online tomorrow and they were as effective generally with infected patients as they have been previously in smaller samples. How would that change what you would say the appropriate response should be by governments?
Well, I would think that they would fast track all those the mechanisms by which those drugs are manufactured and distributed. I think that the changes that we see in the FDA and the whole chain of command up to the president, I think have been totally appropriate and have resulted in, hopefully we'll see this flattening of the curve that Dr. Fauci has recommended and is very hopeful of by these are draconian measures. But
Right,
these
but
things are.
But will we get back to normal? I mean, I know it might not be a month from now or 2 weeks from now, but I mean, we can't be. I mean, is this our new normal?
This will be the new normal for several weeks, maybe months. I think that this is not dissimilar to the national emergency that we had with 9/11. 9/11 changed the way that we do a lot of things still today. So I think that
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Finish.
Well, I was in Asia during the SARS epidemic, and so I saw the anxiety and panic that created. And because of that, in Asia, they were able to contain it. It didn't get outside of Asia. It didn't become a pandemic, and they were able to contain it. But whenever this hit and was recognized by places like Bangkok and Singapore and South Korea, they said, oh, we remember SARS, and they jumped on this right away. And that's why they've been so successful and why the Western world has not had the same element of containment is because they had no memory of SARS. It was kind of a remote concept. Oh, yeah, we heard about SARS, but we didn't experience it. The lethality of SARS is probably anywhere between 5 to 7 times greater than what COVID-19 is. It was a much more lethal virus in terms of mortality.
Less
contagious. It didn't have the ease of transmission, but it was a much more lethal virus than what COVID-19 is.
Although we had 60 million people infected with H1N1 and 12,000 people die, and the response was nothing like this.
That's true. But again, the mortality rate, again, for H1N1 is about 1/10 of what it is with COVID-19.
So far as we know right now.
Correct. We think that that's where it's going to land.
Just going back to the antiviral treatments, because, that's not a cure, it's a treatment. But so people could still get infected, still get sick, still need to be treated. This could roll on for months. I mean, actually, even in some of those Southeastern Asian countries that have effectively combated it to this point, with some natives returning back from overseas travel, now they're worried about sort of a second round and a third round, which is not unusual in these sort of viral outbreaks. So my question to you, though, would it be your recommendation to public health officials, to politicians, to say you can stop the quarantines, you can stop the shutdowns, maybe still keep the social distancing culturally, but as long as we have an effective treatment, then we can be less concerned about the lethality of it, and we can start to quickly move back to normal life. You know what I'm saying? Is that a pathway back and that we would recommend? And now that's an appropriate risk that people can take.
Yeah, I think so. And that in combination with vaccine development, that's going to help with kind of future waves of this. We have seen all viruses are going to morph, and that's why we get a flu vaccine every year. We consider a vaccine is not a panacea.
Right.
We consider a pretty good vaccine is when it's anywhere between 40 to 50% effective for influenza. So I would anticipate that a similar vaccine is going to be developed here. I think it'll be sooner than a year and a half, but I wouldn't be surprised because I know that there's multiple vaccine developers that have used existing platforms to be able to design and start manufacturing and testing a vaccine now. But again, you need to know, is this product actually going to work before you start giving it to large numbers of people?
He is Dr. Mark Bruce, emergency room physician and the ambassador to both Belize and Canada for the American College of Emergency Physicians. Dr. Bruce, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
You're welcome, Dan and Amy. Keep up your good work, too.
Thank you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
The more you listen, the more you'll know. This is Chicago's Morning Answer. On AM 560, The Answer.
and they're the best around, and we can prove it. When you're ready for a new or certified pre-owned Ford, just head to our website, joecottonford.com. Find your vehicle and check our price. Then go to any other Ford dealer website and compare the same vehicle. You'll see for yourself which deal is better. In every case, it'll be the Joe Cotton Ford price. And right now, we have some serious specials for you, like 0% for 66 months on select new 2020 Explorers plus $3,000 rebate, or 0% for 72 months on new 2019 Ford F-150s, or 0% for 66 months on new 2020 Escapes plus $2,000 rebate, or 0% for 66 months on new 2020 Ford Fusions plus $750 rebate. Come